Today we're breaking down what seems to be the new and hottest trend in the wonderful world of fitness, plyometrics. In today's video, we'll define what plyometrics are, some basic terminology, and then how to actually include them in your programming. But if this is your first time here, my name's Justina. I'm a New York City-based personal trainer, and my goal is to help make you stronger and smarter through understanding the basics of how your bodies work. If that sounds good to you, I would love for you to hit that subscribe button, stick around so you don't miss any videos. I also want to make a really quick disclaimer at the top of this video that this is not my intellectual property. Most of the tools that I learned in this video that I'm going to break down to you, I did learn from the plyo guy himself, Matt McInnes-Watson. If you've been following my videos for a bit, you may have seen some behind the scenes of a plyometrics continuing education course that I've been taking. I will leave that link down below, but this was with Matt, and he is one of the top educators right now teaching general population how to implement this type of work into their programming. So with that being said, let's dive into what plyometrics even are. Plyometrics is very simply jump training, but we can get a bit more specific because technically not all jumping is plyometric in nature. To be considered plyometric, your muscles and tendons need to go through the stretch shortening cycle. This cycle is essentially when a quick, powerful eccentric or lengthening contraction is immediately followed by a concentric or shortening contraction. And in between the two is something called the amortization phase. Without diving too much into the physiology, since that's going to get really boring really quickly, this is basically where the energy you just created from releasing the eccentric contraction is then converted into the concentric contraction, aka that force production. So the shorter the amortization phase, the more power you can produce. On the flip side, the longer the amortization phase, the less power you can produce. Think of it this way. If you're jumping, but you're taking a long pause between every single rep, you're losing all of the energy and all of the momentum, frankly, that you just created. Versus if you're continually jumping, you're producing a lot more power. Make sense? Now let's talk about why you should be jumping. Like anything, there's going to be a lot of crossover in benefits and like where you can get these benefits. But I'm just going to kind of spout out a bunch of stuff, list them on the screen here so you can see some of the benefits of plyometric training. Plyometrics can help increase your power, your coordination, your ability to absorb force. They can improve your balance, your agility, and to a point improve your bone density. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about like the specifics with programming when we jump into that part of the video, but I really like to think of plyometrics as a tool to teach people stiffness, but also teach people how to yield into movements. And I know I've talked about different like movement qualities and the importance of training them. Specifically, I broke that down very clearly in this video up here, and I would say the plyometrics comes under some of that speed or power training. But if we even think of it simpler than that, including plyometrics, even in super low doses, is going to help keep you really mobile and fresh as you age. You're going to be able to play hopscotch with your grandkids. You're maybe going to be able to go for a short run. You can dodge a biker when they come out of nowhere on the sidewalk. I like to think of all of these different movement qualities as just ways to keep your options open as your body ages. So with all of that, let's dive into some basic terminology so we're all on the same page before we actually jump into the programming aspect. So the first exercise we've got up here is a leap, more commonly known as a pogo. And a leap is essentially jumping on two legs. So this is a bilateral movement, but we can take this bilateral stance in a lot of different ways depending on what the adaptation is that we're looking for. We can have the feet next to each other. We can do this from a kickstand position. We could travel this laterally. There are a ton of options here, and personally, I think this is the best entry point for people into actual plyometric work. Then we're going to move into hops. And these are not surprisingly much more challenging because now you're not only absorbing your entire body weight on 2 feet, but on 1 foot. Just like leaps, we have a lot of programming options. We can do these in place. We can do them for distance. We can do them for height. So while there are a lot of options here in terms of programming and what you're trying to get out of them, I will say I think that hops are a pretty advanced progression and that bilateral leaps are a better starting point. And then finally, we're going to move into bounds, which I think is like a nice in-between option between leaps and hops. Essentially, this is going from 1 foot to the other. And again, we have lots of programming options here. We can do them for distance. We can do them laterally. We can do them for height. And in general, I would say that I use leaps and bounds much more frequently with my general population clients than I do hops. Now, the last element I want to dive into here before we hop up on our feet That was so stupid. But anyway, the last thing to talk about here before we jump into actual programming is intensities. So you want to think of these as different tiers, or basically just like effort that you're putting in. The same way that if we were programming a lift and we said, okay, this is a 7 RPE, the terminology is just going to be a little bit different. So at the bottom, we have light tier, which is low effort. I would say if you want to put a percentage on it, it's like up to 30%. I'm kind of just making that up as we go, but this is your very light effort. You should be able to do a lot of reps here. It creates very minimal fatigue, and this is a great entry point because it's not super fatiguing, so you can get a lot of rep practice in and really give people that opportunity to learn a movement. Then a step above that, we're gonna jump into medium tier. This, let's say, I don't know, like 40 to 70% effort. Again, we're just kind of pulling stuff out in terms of numbers. But in this tier, I would definitely say it's gonna be lower rep than your light tier, but this is where we get a little more effort involved. And this is where a lot of people are gonna land once they actually understand the mechanics of what they're trying to do. Then above that, we're gonna move into ping tier. Don't ask me why it's called ping. I don't really know, but this is gonna be like your all out max effort, so up to 100%. This will be lower rep, obviously, because it's gonna be much more fatiguing. And I'm only gonna use these in certain scenarios, which again, we'll talk about in the programming aspect in just a moment. Then finally, we're gonna get into deep tier movement. Now, this is gonna be kind of like a separate but adjacent scale than our light, medium, and ping. Deep tier movements are specifically getting us into deeper stretches of ranges of motion. For instance, let's talk about a jump squat. A jump squat, you're going all the way down into the bottom of your squat range of motion and then exploding out of it. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about programming and how I would approach adding in deep tier movement, but that's the basic idea. Just like exercise options, we're always going to have a time and a place based on the client in front of us and the adaptation that we're looking for when we're thinking of intensity prescription. So with that, let's jump up on our feet and we're going to talk through some programming. All right, now let's break down 4 different exercises and I'm going to show you exactly how I would program these in certain scenarios. So the first thing we're going to jump right into are some light tier leaps. So as a reminder, our leaps are bilateral and we're going to do these in place. So just to break down the form here, I've got my feet next to each other and all we're going to do for our light tier is think of this almost like a little jump roping action. So I'm pulling my toes up off the floor. My arms aren't necessarily really helping me, but I'm not keeping them super stiff and I'm just letting them kind of move with the rest of my body. In terms of programming for these, I'm going to do them after movement prep, but before we're doing any like really heavy power or big lifts. So the reasoning for this is because I'm going to use it to create some stiffness, especially in beginner clients. This is a great entry point, not only to learn how to jump and introduce some plyometric work, but it's also going to help require some stiffness of that trunk to support some power or some big lifts like some back squats or some deadlifts. All right, moving into our second exercise, we're going to do a medium tier lateral bound. So again, medium tier is more like that 50% effort. So we do want a little bit more height, a little bit more intensity, and we are going to be traveling this side to side since it's a bound, which means foot to foot. So I'm going to start this on one side of my space, a little bend in the knee, and I'm simply bounding or hopping from foot to foot. You'll notice with these that my energy is thinking up rather than down and sinking into it. That's going to be more of a deep tier lateral bound. Again, we're thinking medium, which is going to be a little bit more upright, okay? In terms of programming, I'm going to place these for the most part in the same spot that we just talked about with our light tier leaps. The reason for this is because, again, we're thinking of creating stiffness, we're thinking of that reactivity component, and in a workout, maybe I'll put these on a day where we have lateral lunges programmed. So we're really priming that reactivity side to side, firing up all of those stabilizing muscles like the abductors and adductors. All right, the third exercise we're going to look at are ping tier hops. I'm going to expose myself right away with how bad I am at hopping. And because we're shorter on space and hops are typically a little bit more accessible, done for distance rather than just in place, I'm going to insert a clip of me doing some ping tier hops from another workout that I did outside of this room. So in terms of where I would place these in a workout, again, I'm going to keep it really boring, but I'm going to put them after movement prep, but before any like big heavy lifts. Again, the reasoning for this is because we're trying to prime that reactivity, getting a little bit more power involved and creating that stiffness. In terms of who I think this would be good for, again, hops are a lot more advanced than the 2 options we just started with, simply because of the single leg nature of it. So I'm going to say that this is for somebody who is already really, really good at ping tier leaps or bilateral pogos, however you want to phrase it. Somebody who can bound really well is a great candidate for this too, because now you are getting at least a dabbling in that unilateral work. And this is a really great drill for people like runners or people who play a sport, because you are typically going to have to generate a lot of force on one leg at a time. So again, I do think this is a more advanced movement, especially at this ping tier, but it's a good one to throw in if you are looking for a challenge or your client is. All right, final movement here is going to be a deep tier split stance leap. So that's a lot of words. Let's kind of break down what each one means. Deep tier, we're going to be deep in a full stretch. What stretch position? Split stance. So that is going to be one leg in front of the other. And then leaps means that we're staying on 2 feet, but we are jumping up and down. So that's how we kind of decipher what we're actually looking for here. In terms of our deep stance leaps, we're going to switch it up and we're going to play with a few different options. So option number 1 of where you could put this is actually supersetted with another exercise. So what I typically like to do here is either before or after the drill, depending on, what type of adaptation or what I'm trying to recruit from it. We can pair this with, let's say, some really heavy reverse lunges. So if you have somebody who isn't really comfortable getting in that full deep stretch position in their reverse lunge, especially with that back leg extended and that hip extension, I would say put these first, maybe even support it. So what we're going to do is come down to the bottom of this position, and I would just oscillate down here and get people really comfy in this deep stretch. Then we can go right into 2 weights by our side, nice heavy full range of motion reverse lunges. Another option is to put it afterwards and think of it more like a burnout. So we can keep it in that superset format, but now instead of using it as a primer, we're kind of using it to finish it off. Another option, again, you can always put it at the beginning of your workout in your movement prep. You could also put it at the very, very end of your workout, maybe going through some isometric holds. Maybe we're building in terms of the intensity here. So something that is an option as a finisher, since we're already talking about that. Let's say we're going to go through a nice hold here. So we're going to start in an isometric position, tuck in the hips under, lots of length. Let's say we hold that for 10 seconds. Now let's say we're going to start to build. We want 10 seconds of oscillating at the bottom of our deep tier. Now, let's say our final 10 seconds is all out max. So we're trying to get as high up off the ground as possible, keeping that torso position, as little ground contact time as you can. So I think deep tier is fun because you have so many different programming options, and it does definitely require a certain amount of stiffness. But on the flip side, unlike our leaps, our bounds, our hops, it is also going to require a lot of yielding, or I like to say melting into the position to really help relax yourself into those deeper stretches, range of motion. So hopefully this was helpful in just showing you what plyometrics are, why you would actually use them, and then how to actually use them inside your programming. I do have an entire workout within the Fit Club that's basically all of this information, but put into a workout. So I will leave that link below. If you have any specific questions about plyometrics, please leave them in the comments below. Again, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos, and I will see you in the next one.